Yeah, can you hear my voice? I'm so sorry. Can you see my PPT file?
Not yet. I think it is uploading. Now I think it's uploading.
Can you see here? Oh, here? Okay, thank you. My title is the personification of nature as the metaphors for Mountain Kumgang. Introduction. Koreans expressed the shapes of peaks and rocks in the forms of humans, animals, and things. In the figurative, verbal, and visual expressions of Mountain Kumgang. Actually, naming unusual rocks for what they resemble and giving them narratives is a universal phenomenon throughout the world, and at the same time can reveal characteristics of the area where a rock is. Previous studies on descriptions of Mountain Kumgang tend to neglect aspects of figurative expressions. Researchers of Korean literature were interested in realistic portrayals of nature as advanced expressions. The nationalistic attachment of art historians to real scenery, landscape painting, including paintings of Mountain Kumgang, which have been in quantities since the 18th century, lead too much into the way of showing our natural scenery as it is. It's an example of 18th century. Conspicuous personification of peaks and rocks in paintings of Mountain Kumgang in the 19th century have been regarded as characteristics of the folk art, a low-level creative way of whimsically making nature humorous or ridiculous. However, I discovered that this representative 19th century his folding screen painting was Mountain Kumgang, with remarkable personification was for upper-class scholars, not ordinary folk. I realized that this type of figurative perception and expression had long existed in scholars' poems. The figurative, verbal, and visual expressions used to describe Mountain Kumgang, for instance, shaping a drawing a mountain peak like a person, or saying the peak is like a monk walking, is category of similar from metaphors on a grammatical level. Similes have not been particularly well regarded in the linguistics, the wonderful metaphor theory. However, this study, mine, will deal with these examples of simile in terms of metaphor effect, as well as the tension and vitality that arise from expressing this by suggesting that these metaphors do not provide way to understand the difficult concept as associated concrete object, but rather provide a way to recognize what is present in nature. This is done by drawing often different areas of human knowledge to simulate the imagination, sometimes changing the meaning of nature object. When the effect of these metaphors are valued, the painters and poets who created can be honored as metaphors of metaphor, the classical definition of Aristotle. Let's go the early Joseon dynasty. Chae-soo, a scholar who ranked first in the government examination, described the peaks of Mountain Kumgang using rich metaphor as follows, including Buddhist sense, the bodhisattvas, and every peak has its life. All the peaks are heading to Dharmogata. It's the name, a kind of bodhisattva. I saw them in the picture in the past. Now I'm surprised to see this in the mountain. We reminded this painting in Goryeo Dynasty. In this painting, it's the Geumgang Mountain. It's the King Taejo Wangon, and there's lots of bodhisattvas. And this one is Dharmagata Bodhisattva. It is highly likely that the location of King Taejo in the painting is where Jeongyang Temple. Actually, there is a theory about Taejo Wangon. He came to Jeongyang Temple. He saw Dharma Bodhisattva. This painting described that kind of scene. And according to Yi Wons, in the early Joseon dynasty, the record, he arrived at Jeongan Temple in Geumgang Mountain. He saw 12,000 Buddhas installed, and it representing Mountain Geumgang's 12,000 peaks. It's the Chesu's poem again. This kind of expression, I saw them in the picture in the past. Now I am surprised to see this. So it means Chesu saw the kind of painting where the rock itself was described as Dharmagata Bodhisattva. Yeah, this kind of Buddhist sense is in the early Joseon dynasty. As you know, the Goryeo dynasty's influence must be in the early Joseon dynasty. Let's go the middle Joseon dynasty. The middle Joseon period scholar Yi. In his Song of Pung-ak, actually, Joseon dynasty scholars prefer to call Mountain Geumgang Mountain Pung-ak to escape the Buddhist sense of the word Geumgang. The lyrics say, one is pointed like a spear, the kind of things, and Yi place the political ritual sense of the king and his subject before the Buddha in his figurative depiction of the Mountain Geumgang peaks, along with fighting soldiers, ladies, leading scholars, monks, including monks. Later, Lee Kyung-seok, another scholar, in his poem, Song of Pung-ak, his description is long, like this: the hanger, the lady in Myeongushu Mountain, and the lady of Yangtai are the mysterious, beautiful lady from Chinese mythological literature. So this kind of thing shows the refined life of as a visionary writer, and he's showing the Confucian value. So this kind of layout, we could see he used lots of Chinese classical book, Huinanzi, Zhuangzi, and Wenshan. Two new publications such as Wu Bing, written by Du Mu, the scholar of Ming Dynasty. And then in the late Joseon Dynasty, in the 18th century, many painters of Mountain Geumgang were suddenly produced. Painter Jeong Seon led the popularity of paintings of Mountain Gungang. Actually, we don't have a surviving painting of Mountain Gungang from Middle Joseon Dynasty. So we have many paintings from during the 18th century. As I told you in my instruction, these paintings were given value in that they depicted Korea's natural scenery. Previously, then, Chinese spots such as Xiaoxiang and carved valleys of Mountain Wuyi, the place of the scholar Zhu Xi, were the main theme of Korean landscape painting. However, in Jeongseon's painting, the personification of peaks and rocks, it means unrealistic representation, appears very clearly and repeatedly. His personification is also characterized by for certain rocks. A good example is Lion Rock. In this painting, this part, we could see the lion here. Yeah, he depicts this rock, it's the lion like this. And could you see the turtles in this painting? Yeah, and human-shaped rocks. Actually, Jeongseon repeated this kind of expression for certain rocks. It's another painting for this part, 7 stars. And it's another painting for Patula. And some lines from poems at the time about the Mountain Gungang are like this. A lion crouching down looks scary. Or the Kim Chang-hoop, Lee Eui-hyun, these guys are friend or teacher of the painter Jeongseon. Or I saw it from afar and suspected it was a real lion. 2 rocks east and west look like turtles lying face down. Children's poem like this. And these metaphorical expressions emphasizing the particular eccentricity of the particular rock were repeated in their paintings and poems. This kind of thing, expressions used for certain rock and other mountain peaks remained in their natural state. Like this. So the other part are not looks like any animals or human beings. While usually this way focused on finding and emphasizing objective singular shapes of particular rock, sometimes it went beyond the objectivity to create a kind of shared expectation. Lion rock was given not because of the shape of the lion, but because of the sound of the water around it. Actually, if I visit Gungang Mountain, I couldn't find the lion rock because lion rock is not like lion actually. These expressions seems to have been used as a way of speaking within a group of writers who enjoyed the excursions, traveling as evidence of their having visited bizarre landscapes by conveying their shared perceptions. In my thinking. We will go to the 19th century. In the painting of Gungang Mountain of the 19th century, the conspicuous, impressively depicted figure-shaped mountain peaks seem to be a dramatic change compared to Jeongseon's painting. People thought it's the characteristics of folk art, but this kind of change is found in the one literati painter, Hoppil, in the middle 18th century. This part you could see the animal like the head and many people are here. And the missing painting by Kim Hong-do's painting is missing. But when Kim Hong-do completed the huge painting of Kumgang Mountain at the order of King Jeongjo, Lee Dong-mu, a very influential scholar in the late Joseon, composed a poem to describe the mountain peaks. Actually, the inscription on the painting of Kim Hong-do. So his poem is very, very long. I'm showing you only half of them in the description. In his description, you could see various animals, things, and including, including Buddha, Buddhist sense, and the last part is for the blessing of the country. As I told you, we have know the painting by Kim Hong-do. It must be great and could be showing this kind of description. But we could see Kim Hong-do's Manpok-dong surviving painting in the distance, kind of evidence that this part. Figures painting. So Kim Hong-do's expression was different from Jeongseon. And it's the painting, the very huge. If you look at the paintings of Kumgang Mountain on the 19th century folding screen, it looks like mountain peaks are formed of people from various occupations. I argued that this folding screen painting must have been made for an upper-class family after tracing the written names of the places in the painting. So it shows the way that scholars perceived the mountain at the time. The pictorial personification in this folding screen was previously considered to be the aspect of the folk painting, the innocent expressions of the people. However, it should be interpreted as being more freely expressed, reflecting the traditional attitude of scholars. It has long been a tradition to express one's religion or way of thinking while comparing rocks to various figures or animals. The Buddhist view of the mountain peaks and rocks is in fact passed down throughout the Joseon dynasty and was suppressed in the poems of scholars under the influence of Neo-Confucianism in the mid-Joseon dynasty. In the 19th century, more people began to travel to Kumgang Mountain, and the production of huge holding screen paintings of Kumgang Mountain became popular. The addition of early and middle Joseon traditions to the 19th century's view that depict a pleasant experience seems to have allowed the metaphorical expressions for the mountain in the 19th century to become free and rich in the use of metaphor with the traditional figures. These paintings of Mountain Kumgang by Shin Hak-kwon in the mid-19th century are famous for following Jeongseon's style. So he is really following Jeongseon's brushwork, but the detail showing human-like peaks in Kumgang Mountain. It's different from Jeongsun's painting. It's closely resemble the richness of the metaphor of the painting of Kumgang Mountain during his time, the 19th century. Conclusion. My discussion illustrated how the metaphorical expression for Kumgang, Mountain Kumgang, lasted historically and the differences that emerged over time. So I did something actually with this kind of research. But due to the obligation of the question of Koreanness sought in this symposium, I would like to try this suggestion or rather leap forward. Forgive me. The metaphors used to describe Kumgang Mountain rather than showing the nature of the object employ comparisons of object of personification with the sometimes quite far removed from the concept. These show us the entertainment orientation as well as the brave characters of Koreans and the adaptability needed in the process of digesting outside cultures, namely the power to create Korean culture by joyfully digesting such differences. It would be nice to say that the creative and rich metaphors using to describe the peaks of Kumgang Mountain and the imaginative power to enable a lively counteraction with the heterogeneous things, in fact, fulfill Aristotle's revealed role of the master of metaphor. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to see all these different paintings like Kumgang Mountains. I never haven't seen these paintings, and so thank you so much. And then her talk is followed by the comments by Taewon Kim. And actually, her office is next door. It's very weird. She's talking from next door. Please welcome Taewon Kim.
Thank you for the very interesting, intriguing talk, Professor Go. I really enjoyed the amazing pictures that you showed us before. I myself always wondered about the mysterious forms that I used to encounter from the old paintings of Mountain Kumgang. Now I came to understand the reason why they looked like very weird people and animal. And honestly, for me, something that you showed us before really looks like the important male organs. No? Yeah, so that's very interesting part. Now, then, how long I can go? Maybe 10 minutes, 5 minutes, or a few minutes? We don't have enough time, right?
We have enough time. I think it's up to 11.
Okay.
So I think,
Because basically, basically my comment is just to sum up her beautiful, interesting talks. So I just want to point out to my questions. There are two. And so the first, it's about gender difference because most of the example you showed us are about male experience, male imagination and representation of this sacred mountain. So I wonder if there was different imagination by different gender, especially female literati or female writers who might have different metaphors for those the same mountain. And the second question is actually I was wondering about the relationship between this very interesting imagination of Kumgang and geomancy or Chinese feng shui. So, as you know, we have different kind of belief in the world, but in common, we used to believe the very close association between the land and the spirit, or we used to perceive nature as organic form. This is sort of the universal phenomenon throughout the history. So I was wondering if this case, very interesting case, is specific only to Mountain Kumgang, or maybe we can kind of expand this kind of thought or consideration of this nature to larger geographic or geomantic knowledge. So these are my questions. Thank you very much.
So maybe Yanni can give a short answer, then we can ask other questions to other people.
Actually, her questions are very big questions. Can I reply it after break time? Yeah, it's a long story. Yeah, it's a very different story she's talking. You know, it's a very important part of my discussion.
Okay, then maybe other people. So Yanni, could you please remove the PowerPoint so we can see other people's face more clearly?
I cannot remove this. How
Oh,
can
you
I?
cannot remove? Oh,
Yeah, I'm trying.
선생님
I
음성을
don't know.
누르시면 돼요. 아니 무슨 소리야? 지금 공유를 누르시고요. 공유 중지를 누르세요, 선생님.
공유를 누르고
공유를 누르면 공유 중지가 떠요. 그 근처에.
no 공유 중지.
저는 지금 공유를 안 하고 있어서 안 뜨는데요. 이때 오른쪽 아래 보면 빨간색 공유 중지 버튼이 떠요. 제가 다른
I'm
걸
so sorry. I cannot.
그러면 제가 공유 중지를 할 수 있는지 볼게요. 아니면 네, 그냥 일단 진행하세요.
yeah.
You can continue. I will try to find how to...
So in the meantime, anyone who has a question, actually, I cannot see the whole screen. Maybe you can just speak, or you can leave a message in the chatting.
Or just raise a hand, like using the function. I'd like to. Okay.
Now I think it's working. So
Yeah, I know. And then yeah. No. I will choose the stop the sharing because I mean please continue.
yeah. So anyone have questions to Yanni?
Now we can see all right.
Did I remove my file?
Yeah. I think
I
now
don't
we
know.
can see everyone's face, right?
So anyone have questions to Yanni?
Go ahead, Hannah.
Oh no, Maylin, you should go first. I just gave a talk, so.
Thank you for your talk. That was really interesting, and I really liked your use of Aristotle's theory of metaphor, of finding similarities and dissimilarities. And so, and I'm very intrigued by your thesis that this is something that's, if not totally unique to Korean culture, particularly emphasized by Koreans and Korean culture, and should be seen as kind of part of Korean identity. So I was wondering if you could say some more about that. Like what especially do you see in Korean culture in particular? Because lots of cultures engage in metaphor and aesthetic interpretation and personifying nature. But could you say a little bit more about the Koreanness in this? I guess that's how I'd put it.
Actually, I don't know. In the first sentence, I told you in my instruction, this kind of phenomena is universal. But what is a very Korean part? I think I need more research. The metaphoric expression in China and Japan. I'm so sorry, I cannot answer very well to your question. I think about that, but I couldn't. But I think this part itself looks very interesting to me, even to Korean. But I couldn't explain the real meaning and the very Korean thing very well. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Well, that's okay. I was intrigued because you described like the bravery of Koreans in this process and the process of
Just
digesting.
feeling, yeah, just feeling.
Thank you.
So Hannah has a question.
Thank you. Yeah, it's actually really similar to what Malin asked. Although I think you can say that it is universal, but not that shared, because there aren't a lot of countries that were under so much pressure to keep their own identity at the context of outside forces constantly trying to take them over. So like Ireland comes to mind, where they were like a small country that tried to like have their own identity at colonialism going on for centuries. So that was more like a comment, I guess. But towards, the end of the talk, I was interested in this kind of like joyful aspect of it that you found out. There's like a playfulness going on. And so I was wondering if that should be something that's out of necessity, where like the Irish say they have to like laugh because or else they're gonna cry, right? So is it kind of like that where they need to like have fun with it? Or you think there's something going on? This is just like Koreans like to have fun, or like how should we think of that aspect of the
Thank you very
visual
much.
play? Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we
So
have time?
I think we have time. Like we have like the 7 minutes more to
Okay.
go. So if you have any question, we can ask, right? Other
I
than
saw
postponing.
the Christina raising your hand just before, but if you don't have question, then I may say something about the Yeoni's thesis. Christina?
Oh yeah, of course, yes. So John, yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. Christina or me? I think I thought I saw. Okay, me. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. For me, actually, I really like Yeoni's talk because but in short, actually, it is not a matter of just the concept of personification or just metaphor. Because what I wanted to say is actually the expressions which is seen in those pictures, which Yeoni found, Yeoni that kind of personification, the style of personification, and not only that, that kind of trend is not just appear in certain artist work, but rather they appreciate that kind of expression with some kind of connected idea between human being and nature, something like that. And then what I want to say is when once for example, rock is expressed as a kind of lion rock or turtle rock, afterwards they continue to develop this idea. Oh, this is real, and then they appreciate it. So instead of just simple personification, there is a kind of sort of how to say sort of development of unique taste for personification. what I learned from the Yeoni's talk was that. So that kind of, and then they form certain kind of aesthetic interaction between artists and those art critics, let's say. Okay, that's all for the Yeoni's talk.
So it's not the question, right? So
I just because I really like her presentation, and I thought that that is one aspect we can see some kind of Koreanness. I wouldn't want to say that is only Korean aspect or Korean or something like that, only characteristic or something like that. But what I wanted to say is, if you compare the different paintings in the contemporary Chinese painting, we can see the difference. That is my point. Yeah.
Okay, I will do. Thank you.
So do you have any question or comments? Then maybe I just a brief questions. You said in the middle, Joseon, and there is not much painting left. There's a poems about the Kumgang, but there is not much the painting left. Is there any why? There's a reason or?
It's we didn't paint so many times Mountain Kumgang before before the 18th century. Actually, in the 18th century, lots of a group of very wealthy scholars enjoyed travel to beautiful mountain, and they wanted to have the paintings memorizing their traveling. So Jeongsan's painting is showing the kind of culture in the 18th century. But because of the war in the late 16th century, we lost lots of paintings in the early and middle Joseon dynasty.
So then if I have, so short, another brief question is about in the middle, Joseon, you said in the poem, you also described the introduction of Confucian values, but also they are kind of quoting from the Zhuangzi or Huananzi, and also pics are all kind of not hierarchical kind of things. It's not really Confucian in my view. So can you explain more about this kind of very mixture of the Confucian value and also Taoistic value in this middle Joseon?
So basically Confucianism, but they wanted to show their knowledge and as a scholar, the kind of expression in my thinking. But composing poem is not easy job at the time. So, yeah, so it's a very intelligent working with many rhymes from Chinese examples. So they the people I showed you, the guys, Yi Chesu is the greatest scholars at the time. Yeah, they showed their knowledge, the range of their knowledge. I think so.
Anyway, thank you. And if you have there's no other question, maybe we can move to the third presentation by Dobin Che. So please welcome Dobin Che.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me. And I'd like to present my paper about Dasan Jeongyagyong, arguably the most important philosopher in Korean history of philosophy. And I'd like to share my screen here. And thank you. Can you see this screen? Yeah, to give you an expectation when this presentation will finish, I'll let it display like this. And thank you, Alexius, for reading my paper in a short time. Thank you again. So today I'd like to introduce Dasan Jeongyagyong theory of human nature. And I believe his theory of understanding human nature, which is very important in Confucian tradition, is aesthetic. That's my large concept of this paper. So he suggests a 성기호설, which is seeing human nature as taste, 기호. So Dasan, in his commentary on Mencius, which is called 맹자요의, published 1814, he made an announcement that he is considering human nature primarily as taste. So I tried to understand this assertion as the core of his philosophical reconstruction. So human nature is understood through taste. That's my understanding. And this comment appears in Dasan's commentary on Mengzi 3.1a, the first passage in Mencius, in the Mengzi, which talks about 성선, the Shangxian. Mencius discoursed the goodness of human nature, and when speaking, always praised Yao and Shen. So to this passage, Zhu Hui left a famous commentary about his 성리학, Neo-Confucianism. So Zhu Hui comments this passage: nature is the principle, Li, with which humans are endowed by heaven at birth. It is purely good without evil. That's Zhu Hui's commentary on this chapter. And Dasan rejects Zhu Hui's view of human nature as the principle. Instead, he argues that human nature is understood through taste. So one of the major reasons of Dasan's rejection is Zhu Hui's metaphysical view of human nature as principle does not follow from the texts of Confucian classics. So Dasan, when he was in exile for 18 years, he studied a lot and collected all the commentaries of ancient and his contemporaries including the Japanese scholars' commentaries, and he had a series of commentaries on 4 Confucian classics. But this is a philological and philological defense of his rejection of Jewish view of human nature as principle. But my question in this paper is, I think that Dasan view that Jewish human nature fails to promote agents' moral practice, but Dasan's view can achieve the goal of practical learning, 실학, that one. And I'd like to suggest an answer why Dasan's view of theory of human nature as taste can lead us into moral practice. That's my big question in this paper. So let's read the Dasan's commentary in this chapter more carefully. Some have natural preferences to landscape, while others prefer calligraphy and paintings. All these taste preferences refer to human nature. In this regard, Mengzha always discusses human nature in terms of taste preferences. And that's how I read Mengzha's argument about taste analogy. Our aesthetic perceptions necessarily have the same preferences, and that the same natural preferences are confirmed by their emotional effects. So in the previous publication, I argued that we have to see Mengzha's taste analogy through this causation-based view. And Dasan more clearly, Dasan argued that the human nature, Song, is regarded as moral taste, which takes pleasure in goodness and aversion in evil. And this passage comes from his commentary on the doctrine of the Min, the first chapter. And since we are familiar with aesthetics, and this kind of understanding human nature is very familiar to us. We from the British taste theory, Hume and other taste theorists try to understand human nature through the sentiments and pleasure and aversion. And so in the first section, I discussed why I chose the translation of Giho as taste. And many other scholars takes different kinds of translation, disposition, proclivity. But I argue that taste is the most proper term to explain the essence of Dasan's understanding of Giho as human nature. And the Giho is chosen from Mengzha's chapter. All humans have heart preference to virtue, and this is coming from the book of poetry. Human nature prefers this beautiful virtue. Yes, and I set some standard of translation, and the Giho translation should imply the natural motivation, preference. When we prefer, we can have the desire to achieve the object. And evaluation, if we approve of something, then we are making a moral assessment about that object. So from the first criterion, we can say that it is better to avoid two broad terms such as disposition, tendency, and proclivity. And secondly, since this human nature as taste is rejecting the alternative view to Jussi's human nature as the pattern, as a principle, so it must include some metaphysical foundation of such dispositions, such as the human nature, heaven's mandate, or the theological foundation. So rather than Giho's manifested effects like desires and preferences, which happens after we perceive the objects, it should indicate the fundamental cause inside of the human nature. That's my assumption. And thirdly, it must explain what is the epistemic source of recognizing such dispositions. So Giho should be related to sentimental responses and argued by Mengzha. So therefore, So instead of disposition and desires and other general terms like this, I chose taste. No, that's one section. And second section is the question of finding the priority, deciding the priority between emotion-based understanding of morality and reasoning-based understanding of morality, which is very common in Western history of philosophy. So Dasan's human nature as taste theory implies that human nature is disclosed through moral taste that evaluates the moral good and motivates our moral actions. And Mark Seton gave us these two aspects of Dasan's human nature. Dasan's human nature can be understood through our moral appetites, one for appreciation of goodness, another for the practice of goodness. And in the Humean tradition of sentimentalism, sentiments can be the source of moral evaluation, as well as the sentiment is only the power, provide us the power to act by means of our will. And if we accept this assumption of Giho-based theory, then we can face some problems, arranging the moral standard of individual subjective Giho taste. So standard of taste emerges like a question. How can we find the objective standard of evaluation? And secondly, we have to make a coherent theory of moral practice and motivation. How do Giho-based responses lead us to moral practice? And given the philosophical goal of Dasan Silhak, practical learning, I believe this second question is more important than the first one. And thirdly, we need to, as a contemporary philosopher, we are more prone to ask this question: how to determine the priority between reasoning and sentiment in making moral judgments. So in this rough state process of making moral judgment and practice, we can ask which stage is most important for Confucian moral self-cultivation. And Dasan reconstitute the three mental stages amongst the sentimentalist account of virtue. That's my reconstruction. Dasan begins with his theory of human nature as taste, which is the origin of the moral sentiment or four sprouts. So we can assume there is a epistemic faculty inside of the human nature, which is similar to taste preferences. And this is my view that human nature is manifested by moral sentiment perceived through taste. And many scholars of Dasan pay attention to the uniqueness and singularity of Dasan's suggestion of 자주직원 or 권형, which is understood as moral autonomous choice through self-reflection. Human has the natural ability for autonomous moral choice after making reflective thinking about the situation, about the objects. So 권형 means weighing, and 자주직원 means autonomously weighing and reflecting the things. So it includes a reflective stage for seeking the proper sentiment at the given situation. And secondly, activating the capacity, many scholars think is the will, for executing felt sentiment to appropriate actions. And I believe that 권 is very important in the text of Mencius, advice of discretion. 권 in 187, we all must be familiar with this passage. And Kwon, King Chuan amongst the final gives the final advice: you should Kwon. And 4A7:17 and 7A26 as well. Thirdly, as a scholar of practical learning, Dasan emphasized the importance of performance of virtue and promoting good effects. 행사, full-fledged virtue is derived from one's performance, from proper sentiments, not from rational or theoretical reflection of the principle. So he wanted to criticize the Orthodox Neo-Confucians who were happy to reflect the things to gain the true knowledge, attain the true knowledge. And in toward the most important passage of Mengzi, Dasan clearly mentioned that when the benevolent virtue of benevolence is accomplished only after the performance of the good by the will. So with no performance, only with reflection, it is impossible to achieve the ideal virtue of Ren. So we can ask another question: which stage out of these three we should consider as the most important for moral practice, from Dasan's perspective? And as I talked to before, many scholars seem to argue that Dasan would have accepted, Dasan think 자주직원 or 권형, reflection and free will and moral autonomy is the most important part of Dasan's moral epistemology. Especially Professor Baek Min-jung and Don Baker argues that Dasan would have accepted Thomist notions of free will and inferring principles. Given his familiarity of Western studies and Catholicism and Matteo Ricci's works, so Dasan studied Matteo Ricci and Catholicism when he was young, and that was the reason of his exile. So one of his elder brother was executed by the king because of he chose to be executed rather than abandoning Catholic belief. So, but I'm not so convinced about this argument. How Dasan, who wants to reinterpret or revive the original thoughts of Confucianism, as a Confucian scholar, accepted the Thomist notions of Catholicism, Catholicist premises to reinterpret the major texts of Confucianism. And Professor Baek Min-jung explains that Gwon-young first discerns within one's mind true command of the moral mind from various private desires, then obeys it to practice the principle of reciprocity through suppressing one's private desires. So she ascribes Gwon-young to the major mental capacity to act morally. So we can suppress our private desires and private emotions, subjective sentiments, and we can choose the best option before us. Gwon-young is simultaneously a reflective cognitive mechanism and a faculty of volitional praxis. So Professor Baek Min-jung argues that Gwon-young can discern what is morally true, and have the power to act for it. Influenced by Thomism, reconstructed in Confucian context, Dasan, unlike other Confucians, identify the individual human mind as the subject of judgment, choosing and deciding amidst temptation. So I think I understand the power of this rationalistic approach to Confucian ideal way of moral practice, and I think this in the debates about heart of compassion, the Mengjia's Chugunjishin or Churenjishin, happens the same similarly. David Wong argues that the heart of compassion is nothing but an indeterminate feeling, and the most important part we have to engage in is reflection. We have to discern the proper intentional objects and choose to act for it. So it has similar structure. It's not so foreign. But I disagree with this approach, and I argue that Dasan theory of human nature as taste has the priority over Kwon-young for achieving his goal of moral practice. So I need to work on this part more, how to see these scholars' foundation of their conviction, why the Thomist understanding of free will should be involved in understanding 자주직원 of Dasan. But my arguments, my rough sketch of argument against this Kwon-young-focused reading is first, it would override Dasan's explicit philosophical aim of restoring the original meaning of the Confucian classics. So if he puts stresses on the concept of Kwon-young, Dasan would have to appeal the monks' frequent emphasis on Kwon, discretion. And he rarely emphasized the role of Kwon. In the role of Kwon, the concept of free will. So I believe that from this we can find that the presumption of his active adoption of the concept of free will is not so strong. So, but I need to work more on this. This free will reading depends on the Thomist influence to Dasan's moral philosophy, which seems to me a mere presumption. It's a situational evidence. Dasan know Thomism, Matteo Ricci, and Catholicism, and given that situational background, we tend to interpret Kwon-young as the main faculty for acting moral practice. Yes, it's true. Kwon-young's function of discerning does not necessarily entail it has the primary motivational power to act, nor it has a function to issue the true command of moral mind. If Kwon-young's primary role is discerning, it needs a standard of measuring and to seek a proper moral bearing. Thank you, Julian, for that Peter Singer's quote. And from the Confucian mind, Confucian would stress upon the latter part. Without emotion reason without emotion is impotent. But Confucian and sentimentalists would argue that emotion without reason is not necessarily blind. There are some engraved direction engraved moral bearing inside of the emotion. And I think that Dasan followed that tradition. And secondly, this is the textual argument. Kwon-young-focused reading would be contextually untenable. Dasan refers to our capacity for autonomous choice to refute the view that human nature as a mixture between good and bad. And Dasan criticized this view, the blended view, that they mistake this capacity of making autonomous choice for doing good and bad as the emergence of human nature. This 자주직원, capacity for that 자주직원 is the capacity of heart, of the human heart. It's by metaphysical standard is inferior to the human nature. So I'm not sure how the function, the capacity in the heart can represent the essence of human nature. So we have, I think we have to place the human nature beyond the capacity in the human mind. But this capacity can be considered as free will, but lacks a moral bearing. I believe that while the role of Kwon-young is to seek proper moral bearing, employing such a bearing is the function of Giho, an epistemic channel to the essence of human nature. Even if we are influenced by human Giho, which is the private appetites and subjective sentiments, we may act from the responses of the Giho of the moral mind, regardless of whether Kwon-young is a kind of free will. So this I believe this is more related to Confucian ideal of no will driven virtuous actions. Guanyang, considering these ideal, Guanyang remains a means to achieve the constant emergence of the Giho of moral mind. Okay. And thirdly, Tasan's human nature as a taste theory does justice to Mengzi's taste analogies, which take an important role in his argument for internal E. And Mengzi uses lots of taste analogies. You taste roast, bulgogi, of a person similar to other countries' person. So you savoring a roast then also external is the final argumentative trick against Gaozi. And Mengzi believed that it is his winning is so certain about that. And only Dasan's moral taste theory can explain completely about the power of this sentiment-based account of virtue. And as I explained, in this approach of moral taste parallels with David Hume's moral taste theory for determining virtues. And Hume moral evaluation is derived from sentiment of approbation toward objects perceived through moral taste. The term moral taste came from I took it from Hume's text. Hume. And also, this taste understanding of human nature as taste shed a different light to our understanding of Confucian view of human nature. So we can apply the causation to this idea. And Dasan also recognized the causation and mental causation in the mind. If human nature is considered as taste, the heart, it means the song, human nature is manifested in feeling proper sentiments such as the force products. So Dasan distinguishes the human heart into three kinds. First one is physical heart, 오장지심. Second one is spiritual and intellectual heart, 영명지심, which has no, which only have active function. And heart as mental effects. And 심지소발지심. I believe that the last one is regarded as the mental effects, and the first two can function as the mental cause that yields the effects. This distinction implies that there are different kinds of taste, but all expresses as sentiment, 심지소발지심. Okay, if Dasan recognized the causation-based understanding of human nature and the human heart, then we can ask this question: what are the primary causes of human nature in the heart? And as we know, the Confucian debates are roughly focused on this question: how to understand the primary cause of human nature in the heart. Of course, Jushi's view is seeing this primary cause as a pure principle, Li or 본연지성. Following Hong Kyung Kim's translation, the nature of original thusness. So Jushi focused on the metaphysical primary cause in the heart that enables human perfection, and this view implies. This is my interpretation. This view implies an attractive force into the heart when we do moral cultivation through one's epistemic introspection of the principle in order to seek it and get it. So given that we have the principle, the pure principle or 본연지성 inside of our mind or heart, so when we reflect ourselves, then we can seek the pure principle and achieve it. So that's the ideal of virtue cultivation. However, Dasan separated or combined these two causes between two causes of metaphysical and epistemic causes. But P.J. Ivanov argued that Dasan combined these two, natural, and one is ontological cause, and the other is psychological and anthropological account of moral heart mind. But I think the essence of Dasan's approach can be discovered in his separation between these two causes. So he assigns the metaphysical cause of human nature upon the Lord on high, maybe the key, and the nature of heaven's mandate. And he accepted 천명지선 is here. However, the epistemic cause of human nature is our taste. By separating these two causes of human nature, I think Dasan could explain why we should act for it. We should do moral practice, and this is one of the arguments how I can explain Dasan's separation between these two causes directs us into moral practice. But can I have, do I have time for this?
You have 12 minutes left, so you have to give some time
really?
to Alexis McLeod, right? Yeah, our session will end at 11:40, so it's like 12 minutes, right?
Oh, then I hurried too much.
Which means
Thanks,
that
thank
you
you.
almost spend 30 minutes.
Oh yeah. Alexis need to. Okay. So this is my. I'll take this one. My final. So I explained that if we take the 본연지성 or Li as the core of human nature, then we are introspecting into our mind to seek it. However, by separating these two causes, I believe that the metaphysical nature is The Dasan's 천명지성 has no attractive force. Instead, this nature has a repulsive force to drive us into the real world. You should do a moral practice in order to manifest the heaven's mandate, or in order to manifest the order of the Lord on the high. So 천명지성 has a repulsive force to obligate us to manifest its endowment by actual moral performances. So given that we have the keyhole, we can make a judgment how to act and what to do. And from the normativity of manifesting the heaven's mandate, we have to follow and find the keyhole's proper responses and act based upon it. Okay, thank you. I'll close my presentation here.
So thank you. And then the comments by Alexis McLeod from University of Connecticut. Please welcome.
Thank you. So
Thank you.
I'll try to be quick here. First, I'd like to thank Dobin for his excellent paper on a very important philosopher. And I really hope this is the beginning of more work and attention in English language philosophical scholarship on Dasan's thought in particular, but also that of other great Korean Confucian philosophers. I've long thought that Korean Confucian figures have been really unjustly overlooked in Western work on Confucianism in specific. Actually, in my class on Confucianism, I just use Yi Huang for Neo-Confucianism because I think he actually expressed a lot of the stuff better than the Chinese Neo-Confucian stages. So the differences between Dasan and Jushi discussed in Dobin's presentation are particularly interesting, I think, and offer a plausible account of what a systematized Confucian account of nature might look like without the heavy reliance on principle found in the work of Jushi and other Neo-Confucians. Although Dasan certainly would have himself been influenced by these Neo-Confucian views, his attempt to return to earlier views like that of Mengzi shows us other possible directions from Mengzi's work than that taken by the Neo-Confucians. And in Dobin's presentation, the distinction is drawn between Jushi's identification of human nature with Li, with principle, and opposing this, Dasan's identification of human nature with taste. the natural tendency to favor something. Dasan's view links human nature with taste preferences themselves, although as Dobin points out, he does not hold them to be identical. It's unclear to what extent Dasan thinks that this taste can differ between people or whether we share fundamental taste. He mentions examples of different people having different taste, but he seems to think that there's some unified sense in which all of us share taste in some sense. This does seem to track Mengze's view about moral sentiments. The idea, for example, that all of us or most of us will have the tendency to feel panic, for example, if we see a child fall into a well, regardless of whether we act on this feeling. So Dasan's discussion of taste raises for me at least a few questions. 1 and 2 I think are a little bit related. One question this raises is whether human nature can be changed or whether it's always appropriate. Taste is far more variable and changeable than many things we might associate with the mind, even dispositions or other traits. Does Dasan think that our nature can be easily operated on and changed in the same way as we might think taste can be changed? Does this explain how people go bad in the sense of Mengze's sense of kind of being obstacles getting in the way of our nature? Secondly, Mengze's argument for similarities in human nature is hard to maintain if nature is tracked by something like taste, because as Dasan himself suggests, it varies so widely with people, perhaps even more than the general moral sentiments Mengze discusses. There may be some general patterns, but seemingly nothing like what Mengze insists on when he talks about the duan or the sprouts of virtue that all of us have. Third is moral taste such as the heart of compassion that Mengze talks about, the unlinked emotion or the preference itself, or is there some key connection to events and things naturally stirring compassion in the sense of things that should stir such compassion? Because it's at the problem seems to arise here that there's a great deal of variability between people and how they respond to things, right? Going back to the kind of first issue that I brought up, perhaps much more than Mengze himself thought. So Dobin explains that according to Dasan's view of taste, there's a sense of both accessing or recognizing the valuable and also having the appropriate desire responses to the valuable, the morally valuable in this case. One question remaining for Dasan, as well as for Mengze for that matter, is just what the relation between the recognition and the response is within within taste, those two aspects. Are they one and the same, or does one make possible the other one? Is it possible, that is, to recognize but not desire a valued thing, or to desire but not recognize it? Although the latter might be a little bit more difficult. Dobin also maintains that Dasan's view does not identify taste with human nature, but rather maintains that nature is accessed or understood through taste. The recognition and response to particular things suggested by Dasan's view of taste enables us to recognize that which is in our nature. Dobin also points out here that there are steps missing to turn this recognition and response into moral action. Recognizing something as good and gaining pleasure in it as good may suggest that we'll act in ways so as to bring about the good in question, but other steps, of course, are needed. So perhaps one, for example, doesn't know how to act properly, for example, or perhaps our motivational structures might be stunted such that desiring a thing doesn't actually motivate us to act so as to bring it about. The idea for Dasan and for Mengze may be that absent motivational obstacles or improper training and activity, the recognition and response to the good entailed by taste would actually reliably lead to proper moral activity, which makes Dasan's view very, I think, close to what Mengze is doing. So Dobin explains here that Dasan's conception of Kwangyong as reflective is a necessary part of moral cultivation and activity, but more of a centering rather than a foundational concept. So Kwangyong isn't kind of fundamental. The function of taste can do the moral work here, which is really interesting, with the reflective nature of Kwangyong perhaps as a check on the operation of taste, which because of its variability can always mistakenly identify and respond to things. On Dasan's view, like that of Mengze, seems to be a kind of moral sentimentalism that's central to his thought and his conception of accessing human nature, something that certainly would have separated him in certain ways from Juche, and indeed just what we might expect if Dasan was trying to move back toward older Confucian views, as Dobin, I think, convincingly argues. One final, for me, interesting aspect of Dasan's thought, Dasan's thought that Dobin explains here, can be very useful in making sense of the connection of human taste responses to the nature of the world, or what Dasan refers to as the nature of heaven's mandate. This might be put as a response to the question of how the human moral sense, or the sense of taste, connects to maybe taste-independent facts about the world. Perhaps those taste-independent facts can be understood in terms of the nature of heaven's mandate, which is manifest in humans particularly as taste, or at least this taste allows us to access this nature. This raises a number of interesting questions, but the one that's the most interesting to me is the question of whether this suggests a distinction between humanity as constructive of morality and the rest of nature as devoid of morality, or instead suggests that morality is somehow built into the nature of the cosmos via something like principle, but this looks different in its human expression than in its operation of the non-human parts of the world. In a sense, a moralization of the entire world. And its latter view is interesting because it seems akin to some of the things that we see in Neo-Confucian views. So I just want to thank you again for inviting me to make these comments on Dobin's excellent paper and allowing me to be a part of this exciting discussion of Korean aesthetics. And I very much look forward to seeing all the work to come in this area. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And there are two hands, so I'm not sure whether Dobin want to answer MacLeod, as Alexa says, kind of main question, or you want to hear more questions from the floor for other people. Christina, and I saw the hand by Julian Chong. No, not you.
It was flat.
Flat, not the question. Okay, so then, okay, maybe Dobin, you can maybe give some short
I'll
answer.
briefly answer to Alexius' comments. I'm not that smart to remember all the questions. Yeah, I think that to recognition and response and action is the three stage of moral practice in Confucianism, and all the tradition, all the views have different thoughts about how to prioritize this stage, and perhaps if we follow the orthodox Neo-Confucianism, we have to reach that recognition is the most important, and the tool for recognition of the principle is the reflective thinking, and I don't think there is sentimentalist approach to moral practice, but some people say a proper response is important because it is a evidence for our cultivating the pattern or the essence of human nature in a good way. But Dasan wants to focus the third part, how to practice. We have to continuously make a moral practice and to recognize well the pattern and to set up this proper sentimental response. So without acting, we cannot continuously recognize the essence of human nature, as well as we cannot respond properly to the future events. That's my understanding of Dasan. And I believe that normativity comes mainly from the theory of human nature as taste, because that belief about we have the fundamental taste to discern morality, moral goodness, and what is valuable, and having a proper response to that object, like the forest sprouts. That belief can help us to continuously do the moral performances. And without the continuous efforts, Dasan would say the other two ideal of recognition and response would not be achieved. That's my understanding, and I'd like to provide an assumption, an argument why Dasan's human nature as taste can reach that, can attain that goal. Thank you, Alexius.
We cannot hear you.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. So I think it's time's up according to schedule. So maybe we can have 20-minute break and resume the second section at 12 p.m. Right? The 20-minute break.
Sorry, sir. I have one notice to give my poor computer a real break. I'd like to log out first and open WebEx once again, 15 minutes later, 5 minutes before the start. So please re-log in the WebEx later on. Okay, so yeah, sorry for the inconvenience caused. Yeah, that's all. Thank you so much.